Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, back for another installment of the Showdown in the Badlands wild card review. We have 4 classes left, so I'm just going to do them all together, so let's get into it. Here we have Hunter. This is our last Highlander class. For the spells here, we have Sneaky Snakes. It's a 1-mana spell, summon 2 1/1 snakes with stealth. This is very reminiscent of Alley Cat and Wappletinger. I think Wappletinger is still probably the best one just because of its synergies with buff cards and the 0-mana card that gets stuff back. But much like Alley Cat, this one is still probably good enough. The only disadvantage that this has compared to the other two as far as its current synergies in Beast Hunter decks is that it's a spell. So if you find this with your harpoon gun, it's not going to get a discount. That's a really small disadvantage though, and this one gives you stealth. So you can play these and they just get to sit around guaranteed for a turn. That can be pretty good if you want to set up a hyena, or you can play it on 2 and then play Acid Maw the turn after and trade in with them. So yeah, I think that this is a really good Beast Hunter card. They like the 1-mana make 2 beasts because you get to draw with Starving Buzzard. I don't know what else you would use this in, but seems pretty good. Then we have 10-Gallon Hat. So 2 mana for draw a minion, give it +1/+1, and Death Rattle, get a 10-Gallon Hat. So it's kind of like having a 2 mana hero power, draw a minion, give it +1/+1, if this stays around eternally and your guys are always getting knocked out. But it's a lot slower and more finicky than that. I really think that this would have been a phenomenal card a few years ago, but I think that it's probably too slow for today's wild, at least. Then we have Camouflage Mount. 4 mana, give a minion +3/+3 and a random bonus effect. Bonus effects are just the basic keywords. When it dies, summon a chameleon. The chameleon, it will be a 3 mana 3/3 with that bonus effect. So if this gives a minion +3/+3 and Divine Shield, when it dies, you will get a 3/3 Divine Shield chameleon. This seems really good to me. I think that it's assuredly standard powerful, but I don't know that it has a deck in wild. I think that the Highlander card is pretty good and Hunter's other Highlander card is pretty good. So there could be a Reno Hunter that would want to play this. That's the spot that I could see it in the most. Early combo shenanigans show up again, and even Hunter, which is a anti-combo deck, manages to find a spot in the meta. Maybe this would go in that just so that it has something proactive to do. But I think the card is good. It's just, does it have a deck that wants a card like this is all. Then we have Saddle Up. 3 mana, give your beast Death Rattle, summon a random beast that costs 3 or less. This is one of the cards I've ever seen. On to the minions. Messenger Buzzard, 2 mana 1/2 beast, Death Rattle, draw a beast, give minions in your hand +1/+1. I think that this is a really strong card. It just doesn't have the structure to really show off what it does. So like if this was a paladin card, for example, and it drew like not a beast, but something relevant to Paladin, I think this would be pretty good because Paladin is kind of set up to be able to take advantage of stuff like that. But in Hunter, I think it's a lot more awkward. I do think that if this was a battle cry, it would be phenomenal, right? Because like we have other Buzzard in wild, we are drawing a lot of cards, and 2 mana 1/2 draw a beast is pretty decent, but then to also give the stuff in your hand +1/+1 I think is really good. So anyways, I feel like this card is very slightly clunky. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it pop up in standard a lot, but I think that wild Beast Hunter has much more proactive things to do than a good Death Rattle. Next up we have Bovine Skeleton. 3 mana 3/3 undead beast. If this has 4 or more attack, summon a Bovine Skeleton. So we've seen this before, but it didn't have any tribal synergy and it costs more than this, right? I think it was a 4 mana 3/5. But if you can continually buff this thing, first you do it with like a hand, like you use your Messenger Buzzard, you get it, you play it out, it has Death Rattle, you get the 3/3 back, and then you play a Timberwolf and trade it. See, I could see this being a cool standard thing to do. It takes a lot to make a Death Rattle work, I think, and we're not there for a while. Silver Serpent, 3 mana 2/3 beast, rush and poisonous. So it's kind of like 3 mana destroy a minion, which is pretty mid. Quick draw, gain immune this turn. So if you're attacking into something with 2 or less attack, it gets to survive, and if you drew it off the top, it gets to survive. Pretty interesting minion. I feel like single target clears aren't doing that well in Wild. It does help with things like Giants and Edwin and stuff like that, but you really want your clears to go wide at this point. And we already have Acid Maw and Dreadscale, which are so good at doing both of those things. So I don't really see this in Wild. Then we have Star Shooter, 4-mana 2/3 weapon. After your hero attacks, get an arcane shot. At first, I thought that this was pretty mediocre, and it might be, but I also thought that Rinling's rifle was going to be pretty mediocre, and it ended up being really good. This doesn't play the secret like that does, though, but this has another charge, and you have a lot more control over the effect of this. So it's just kind of like a face card, but if you add the damage per shot, this is 4 mana for a 4/3 weapon, which is pretty good, but you have to spend 3 mana to play all those arcane shots. So it's really 7 mana for a 4/3 weapon. The arcane shots can go places that your weapon doesn't go. You get the flexibility of spreading out the damage a little bit, as well as you can save it for later. But I think where this is going to shine the most is in an arcane deck. So you want to like get some arcane shots by attacking with this, and then Haldurin or mini Haldurin to give those the spell damage bonus to get even more value out of each of these. Seems like it'll be a really good standard card. I think it's another card that's going to be an even hunter card if it's anything in Wild, but even then I don't know that it makes the cut. Something to note, this would be pretty good with the Hunter quest line. We saw with Rapid Fire that cards that give you multiple quest line ticks per card ended up being really good in questline Hunter. You can't run this in odd though, and not odd doesn't even really get experimented with anymore, so it could be that the nerfed version of the quest line just, you know, doesn't make the cut. But I do think that this is a serious consideration for a deck like that. On to the legendaries, we have Spurfang, 5 mana 2/5 beast, battle cry, and death rattle. Summon a random beast with cost equal to this minion's attack. So you're supposed to hand buff this for the battle cry and hand buff or Timberwolf or whatever for the death rattle. Very, very, very standard card. We won't see this in Wild. Then we have Theldurin the Lost, 4 mana 3/4 battle cry. If your deck has no duplicates, gain immune this turn and attack all enemies. It's a one-sided Dustbreaker that goes face. We know that that's good because recently neutral got a one-sided Dustbreaker that goes face and that got nerfed. So this is a really good card. The fact that we just had this in neutral makes it a little bit less exciting, in my opinion. The one advantage this has over that, other than not needing to play a bunch of spells to activate it, is if you do hand buff this, it does a lot more damage, right? So it does make those hand buff spells a little bit more appealing. This will come, if this comes down with like 5 attack, you clear a bigger board and you deal more face damage. I think that's a pretty small bonus. This is just kind of like Highlander gets a one-sided board clear, yay. As far as Wild's concerned, I don't know if Standard's gonna have the time to buff up the hand like Wild doesn't. But I do think this is really cool. I do think that Highlander Hunter could really use something like this, and it's going to be a lot more interesting to build that deck moving forward. So those were the Hunter cards. I do think there are a lot of really cool stuff to play with. I just think that like death rattles are a big ask in Wild because requiring the minion to die before you get its effect is pretty slow. When it comes to Hunter cards for Wild, you kind of like look at it through the lens of Beast Hunter. Pretty much the only strong Wild thing that Hunter does is Starving Buzzard plus good beasts. And then you have like the little side lens of, is this enough to revive the quest line? And I don't think it is. Theldurin is very, very good though. And every once in a while we get this like Reno Hunter craze. I feel like it's once every other expansion. There's like a week or two where everyone's like, wait, is Reno Hunter real? And then it turns out not to be. But if it's going to be real, it's going to be after it gets a really solid Highlander card, and we did get a really solid Highlander card. As for the deck, so obviously I was going to build Highlander Hunter. I like if we're going to build Beast Hunter, we're going to cut the whatever the 2 worst cards are in Beast Hunter and add the snake thing. So that's not super interesting for a showcase deck. But I was building regular Reno Hunter and I was bored. I think for me to like really get me engaged with Reno Hunter is you need to get a lot of like big beast synergy going or something like that. I don't know. But I thought, what if even Reno Hunter? So you get all the benefit of the secrets and the anti-combo stuff. You do lose the 7 mana Hunter Highlander legendary, but we have ETC for that. So still gets speed in the deck because even gets to cheat that rule with ETC. So this is all the best secrets and all the best secret synergies. We have Camouflage Mount in here to be a new cool card. And also I think that you would always run it in a deck like this. Mid-rangey, and even it's probably one of your better options. I do have Star Shooter in here, and then it's really just to be a fun new card. I don't know that it'll actually stick. But then you get the Reno Lone Ranger hero card. When I put more than one hero card in a deck, sometimes people question it because they're like, you know, like they turn each other off, right? You only need one hero, but both of these are really good tempo plays, right? Like Tavish gives you the secrets and then gives you an improved hero power, and Reno removes the board one-sided and gives you a good hero power. So much like in some other classes where running 2 hero cards makes sense, I believe it makes sense here. You're not married to keeping either of these hero powers up for the rest of the game. You're happy to play the other hero if you draw it. How good is this going to be? I don't think that you're going to get rank 1 legend with it, but if you want to play with some new cards, play it in a spicy Reno Hunter list, I think this is a fun option. On to Mage, we have Overflow Surger, 4 mana 3/2 elemental. Summon a copy of this for each turn in a row you've played an elemental. I love the turn in a row you've played an elemental requirement, because having to have played an elemental last turn has historically been one of the hardest requirements to meet consistently while still having good plays. And this is that, but harder. How good is this? It might actually be kind of good, because I think that it counts the current turn, in which case this is always going to be at least a 4 mana 3/2, and then if you played an elemental last turn, you get an extra 3/2, and if you did it 2 turns in a row, you kind of fill your board. So I do think that this one's all right. The Shaman one, Scar, shares this requirement, and I think it's awful. But so yeah, if you want to like splurge out a bunch of elementals, then this isn't that hard to set up. Elemental Mage is like on the brink of being something in Wild. We've seen some lists popping up recently where you just run all the cheap and discounting elementals with the best cheap effects, and you get on board really fast. Does this have a place in that deck? I'm not sure. It's kind of like the amount of board that this gives you just kind of comes naturally to Pirate Rogue, right? Whereas this one requires you to have had a playable hand both of the previous 2 turns in order to be an all right turn 3 play if you're going to coin it out, or if you got a Kindling Elemental or something on turn 2. It just seems a little fair. It might be that there's so much discount stuff in Mage that this ends up being a turn 2 play sometimes, in which case, you know, getting 3 3/2s on 2 seems a lot better, but I'm not holding my breath. Next up, we have Reliquary Researcher. If you've excavated twice, cast 2 random Mage secrets. So the Mage Excavate card is the Azurite Hawk, which is a 4 mana 5/5 elemental beast. Get a random Titan. It costs 1. So unlike Colossals, all the Titans are at least pretty good. So you can low roll with this, like you're not going to be as excited about the Mage one as you're going to be about Sargeras or something like that. But I do think that the legendary Mage Excavate is a good token to get, but you have to excavate 4 times. So this rewards you for excavating 2 times, and you cast 2 random Mage secrets. This seems like it's going to be a really good standard card. I think that efficiently casting multiple random Mage secrets from the smaller pool there has historically been good. In Wild, we have so many terrible secrets, and Excavate's going to be slower, and it's just too fair of a wild card, I think. But I could easily see this being really solid in standard. Then we have Blast Mage Miner, which is the same cost as a very similar card, I think, and has more stats. So big improvement overall for this. I think it's called Meteorologist, I forget. But anyway, 6 mana 4/4, Battle Cry, Excavate a treasure. For each card in your hand, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. So yeah, I believe the old one was the same cost and had -1/-1 stat wise, but this also gets you a card. So you get +1 card in hand over the old version of this. Seems really solid. Excavate package for Mage, really shaping up in standard. Can't say for Wild. Sunset Volley, 10 mana fire spell. Deal 10 damage, randomly split among all enemies. Summon a random 10 cost minion. So Mage actually has some really good like big spell activators that don't quite quite have the support they need to be good. So Belinda is really good, right? But you have to like not play any of the cheap stuff like Ice Block to guarantee its effect, and you only get to run the one Belinda. And then you have Dragon Caster, but all the dragons in Mage stink. So if you could play Dragon Caster and not have to run a bunch of really bad cards in your deck to activate it, you know, coin Dragon Caster, play this is probably really good. It is starting to seem like Spiteful Summoner level of power in Wild though. So yeah, I don't think that the stars are quite aligned for this. Next up we have Heat Wave. So 2 mana fire spell, deal 2 damage to an enemy minion and its neighbors. And then if you quick draw it, you do it to all enemies instead. So that's the non-adjacent minions and also your opponent's face, which is pretty decent. I do think that this is a really good card, but I also feel like it's not good enough for current mage decks. The current good Quest Mage doesn't want to remove your minions. It wants the opponent to have lots of minions so that Frost Nova is like scuffed Time Warp. So yeah, it doesn't really want to bother with that. We see a lot of lists cutting First Flame even. And the 2 health breakpoint is a lot worse than the 3 health breakpoint. At 2 damage, you're not clearing Anchor Totem, you're not clearing Ship's Cannon, none of that type of stuff. So it's very niche useful in the early turns, and then it's like both ineffective and somewhat not what you're trying to do. I do think that if a regular Reno Mage showed up, it would want this. Maybe some other control-ish mages would be interested in it, but as long as Quest Mage is dominating the class, I don't really see a spot for this in that deck. Next up we have Stargazing. 2 mana arcane spell, draw a different arcane spell. If you play it this turn, it casts twice. Again, in the lens of Quest Mage. At first this seems really good, but then you think about it and you're like, is it though? So if you hit volume up with this, odds are you can't cast the volume up in the same turn. And if you do, you're not necessarily gaining much with it, right? So you've already cast volume up. Some of your spells are probably getting overdrawn on the second one, which I'm not afraid of losing cards, but then you've just played 2 mana to draw a card, right? I feel like the Stargazing didn't give you any value. You can also draw a Potion, and if you don't have anything worth getting back, that's not very good. You probably don't want to play Potion of Illusion the same turn you play this. Where it would be really good is if it hits Mana Biscuit. If it hits Mana Biscuit, it's the nuts, but it's pretty restrictive, right? So if you don't play the card that turn, it's just 2 mana draw a card, which is terrible. So that's what I'm concerned with, is like a lot of hits in the deck are not worth playing the same turn you play this, or are hard to play the same turn you play this. So I don't think it's a Quest Mage card. It could be really cool for decks that try to play a specific arcane spell. Like maybe, like I feel like APM Mage would have loved this. Like APM Mage would have really liked this, but you know, Sork was nerfed. Anyways, I don't really see a spot for this anywhere. Then we have Cairo Preservation. 2 mana frost spell, freeze an enemy, excavate a treasure. This can freeze face, which I think is really important for freeze stuff in Wild. So if an excavate deck exists, it will really appreciate having access to this, but considering how much the Shaman Galakron package has fallen off, I don't really have a lot of faith in other packages like that, where there are a bunch of like slightly overcosted cards with high synergy with each other. I don't know. It doesn't really seem like it'll land in Wild. Then we have Azurite Vein. 3 mana, secret. When the enemy plays a card on the turn that it entered their hand, get a copy that costs 0. Do you remember Monobind, a secret of all time? I imagine that this is about as powerful as Monobind. And on to the legendaries, and here we have Mes Aduni the Fractured, and this is the first one that I think is actually pretty interesting for Wild. So 6 mana 6/5 elemental, battle cry, draw an elemental, split it into 2 halves. So it tries to split evenly, but it will give 1 more and 1 less if it's uneven. Say this draws a 5 mana 5/5 elemental, one of them will be a 3 mana 3/3 and the other will be a 2 mana 2/2. Where this I think has a spot in Wild is of course Quest Mage. So Vexalis is a 5 mana 3/5 legendary that makes your arcane spells cast multiple times. It's become a really big high roll card for Quest Mage, where you get it out and you Mana Biscuit and it prints a bunch of mana, and then if you time it right, not only do you get to play a bunch of Mana Biscuits that turn, but you also get to play the quest that turn. So that's 5 mana and it already makes the list. The high roll is so good that I've tried running Elemental Evocation in that deck just to make Vexalis easier to cast. and easier to cast with Mana Biscuit. But the problem with Elemental Evocation is they're dead cards when you don't have the Vexalis. This means that if you draw it before your Vexalis, you play it on 6, and the next turn you have a 3 mana and a 2 mana Vexalis. So a 2 mana Vexalis is definitely cheap enough that you can play a bunch of Mana Biscuits and stuff the turn that you play it and activate your quest. This has 2 problems. One, Messadoon the Fractured costs 6 mana, so you have to be able to have played a 6 mana 6/5 do nothing on turn 6. And the other problem is draw order, right? So if you draw Vex first and then you draw this does nothing. So yeah, the advantage is, unlike Elemental Evocation, as soon as you draw this, you will get to discount the Vexalis because this goes and finds it. And the downside is it comes out really late and it's useless if you draw Vex first. So I kind of wrote that off at first, but then I was thinking about it. What if you just ran both? Both Messadoon and Elemental Evocation. So now you have 2 cards. You can either draw Vexalis and then discount that with your Elemental Evocation, or you can draw this and then discount this with your Elemental Evocation, and it will go get your Vexalis and discount it for you. As far as the draw order, we're already running a ton of draw order matters stuff in that deck, so I'm not concerned with adding another high roll if the high roll is this good. It's going to be our 3 extra slots worth it for that, and I think they might be, to be honest. I think a 2 mana Vexalis is just absurd. Being able to find that on turn 4 or turn 2 instead of turn 6 like you're supposed to ought to be really good. If you manage to play this early, that's when having the 2 Vexalis starts to really matter. You can use the more expensive one initially to kind of get a little bit of advantage and set up the turn for the second one. So I don't know, I think that there's a lot of potential with a double Elemental Evo Messadoon Vexalis Quest Mage, and I'm sure you're all really happy to hear me say that. Tathalon Bloodwatcher, 4 mana 2/5. Cards that didn't start in your deck cost 4 less, but not less than 1. But not less than 1? More like gross. Ew. Well, that was Mage. I don't think that any of these Mage cards are pushing a non-Quest Mage archetype. I like to play Quest Mage, but I hate to play against Quest Mage, so it's kind of bittersweet. As far as like Quest Mage getting a new thing, I'm gonna have fun trying it out early. Hopefully it ends up being something silly, and Quest Mage doesn't get any better, but you know, we'll see how that goes. For the deck, I did build Quest Mage, but I built Reno Quest Mage. So Reno Quest Mage did get a new card, right? It got the Reno Lone Ranger, so it's a new Highlander card. It's not like we're running the same thing just with a couple of like whatevers, you know. Every class got at least Reno Lone Ranger as far as having an update. What made me really sad about this is like I searched for duplicate to see what all the Highlander cards are, and Mage has so many, and I put hardly any of them in this deck. It's gotten to the point where Kazakis even isn't very good. So Kazakis isn't in here. I didn't include Relicologist, you know, like on turn 6 dealing 10 random damage to minions. It's so 2019. So yeah, we have the good Highlander cards and all of the good Quest Mage cards. And I was actually surprised how much of this deck filled out with just the regular Quest Mage stuff. I put in the new high roll, so I put in the Elemental Evocation, and I put in the new 6 mana legendary. Reno Quest Mage has the added bonus of Zephyrus the Great being a second good elemental. So if you get your cheap Vexalis, that's great. If you get 2 Zephyrus, that's great. Heatwave is in here. This is a Reno Quest Mage, so I do think that it's more likely to want a card like Heatwave than regular Quest Mage is, but it's mostly in here to be a new card. Another thing that Reno Quest Mage and maybe Quest Mage overall did benefit from some of the neutrals too. So Greedy Partner gets you a coin if you have another 2 mana card in your hand. So Licensed Adventurer and Mailbox Dancer have been good in Quest Mage for a while now. Greedy Partner seems like it could be too. I do think that having another 2-cost card in your hand is a much steeper requirement than the other 2 have. So like it seems like it'll be really good at first, but it could be that it's too clunky to make the cut where these other ones would. We'll have to play with it. Dry Scale Deputy, the next time you draw a spell you get a second copy, so you can do something like, it was pointed out after I like suggested putting this in the deck, it was pointed out to me that you can play it on 4 with Ancient Mysteries and get 2 0 mana ice blocks out of your deck. Not in this obviously because we're running Highlander, but just in regular Quest Mage. The problem with Dry Scale Deputy is that it's a Naga, and you really want want our friend Crush Claw Enforcer to draw specifically Commander Savara. I know that some people who don't want to brick run Queen Azara to make sure that your Crush Claw Enforcer does something, and I find that completely relatable. All right, I just look for the excuse to run Queen Azara personally. I'm not afraid to like have my good cards brick, but having the extra Nagas make it worse, because instead of only bricking when you draw Savara first, now you also brick half the time when you draw the non-Savara minion, right? This isn't here to be 3 mana 3/4 get a card. It's in here to increase the likelihood that Savara ends up in your hand, because Savara is so good. So whenever you add another Naga, you pollute that chance and you make the card worse. So I know it makes it seem better from a certain perspective, but it isn't. So anyways, that's the downside of this new thing. I do think that getting a copy of one of the cards that started in your deck as a card that didn't start in your deck to proc the quest is really good, obviously, right? That's why the ETC is good, because you can put Potion of Illusion in the ETC and guarantee a card that you want in your deck came from not starting in your deck. So this new Naga card does something very similar, where it gives you a copy of a card in your deck that will activate Quest Mage synergies. But it is just a 2 mana 2/2, and it does have the Naga tag, and it might not end up being worth it in any Quest Mage list for those reasons. But I wanted to try it out here. So anyways, this came together really smooth. I was surprised at how little bad stuff I had to put in here. Usually when I take a meta not Highlander deck and try to make it Highlander, I have to put in a lower bar of cards to like get to 30 cards, but it did not feel like that when I put this together. So I do not think that this will be the final list for Reno Quest Mage, but I do think that there's a lot going right here, and it could end up being that Reno Quest Mage is a decent alternative to regular Quest Mage. ETC is mostly in here just to deliver Potion of Illusion. So if you're playing it for just one card, you're almost always picking that. Freezing Potion is in here because of things like Questline Druid and Kingsbane and Even Warrior. And you might be asking, if you're going to tech for Kingsbane, why not just put in Sticky Finger? Well, I didn't just list Kingsbane, did I? I listed a few things. Sticky Finger is not good against those other two things, is it? But the other advantage this has over it is Freezing Potion procs your quest and costs 5 less mana than Sticky Finger. So you can actually pause the Kingsbane on the turn you play the ETC. I had a really fun game. It's actually in my YouTube video from last week, of me chaining Freezing Potion over and over again with the rewinds and stuff to beat a Kingsbane. So this not only is useful against more decks, but it also advances your quest and it costs less mana. That's why Freezing Potion, not Sticky Finger. Then Conjured Mana Biscuit is the main synergy with Vexalis, so having the extra one in the ETC is basically mandatory. So Potion of Illusion you always have for Ramoth, Conjured Mana Biscuit you always have for Vexalis, unless you're running a duplicates version, in which case they can just both be in the main deck. And then Freezing Potion is I think the third best option. If you don't want to run a Freezing Potion, I think you just run an Ice Block, but I think Freezing Potion is much, much better. On to Rogue. For the spells, we have Stick Up. 1 mana, discover a quick draw card from another class. I went through the quick draw cards because I was wondering if the neutral legendary was worth having in a Reno Quest Mage, and spoiler alert, no. A reverse spoiler alert, you've already seen the mage deck. But a lot of them, so about like half are minions, and a lot of them are kind of expensive. So this does have the edge of being Discover. You can kind of steer towards one you can play the same turn that you stick up, and that's pretty good. You discover a quick draw card and you get to play it, and its quick draw will be active. Usually discover a card but don't discount it ends up not being any good, right? Like the 1 mana discover effects tend not to get played. It's not a hard and fast rule like Magic Trick, for example, got a lot of play, but almost all the time, if it doesn't discount the card that it finds, it's not going to be any good. I don't think that the quick draw cards are powerful enough to make this happen in wild at all, and I doubt it for standard too. 2 mana Dart Throw. Throw 2 damage darts at random enemy minions. If both hit the same minion, get a coin. So this is pretty neat, right? Like you can play this when your opponent only has 1 minion and always get a coin. So it's like Cleave in Warrior, which is a card that doesn't really see play, but it can hit the same minion, which makes it better, and you can get a coin if it does hit the same minion. So it is rogue removal that doesn't go face, so I don't think it sees any play, but it's an interesting card. Shell Game, 3 mana, get a random epic, rare, and common card from other classes. This is nice because it gives you 3 cards from other classes, which is really good for Bizarre Burglary, which is a deck I like to build from time to time. It also discounts the null by 3. So if you're building Cope Reno Rogue like I like to sometimes, this is a really good upgrade for that deck. Unfortunately, it is also a meme card, so obviously this isn't really going to see any play in Wild, at least, other than, you know, just for fun. 777s, 7 mana, deal 7 damage to a minion, draw 7 cards. So Trickster discounts this to 0, so it'd be 4 mana for a 2/2 and also this effect. And surely draw 7 cards sees play in something at some point. Like, this is really good, but what is it really good in? I don't know. The first deck I was going to build for this was a 777's Miracle Rogue, and I decided against that because another more funnier card was pointed out to me, and the Trickster 777's ended up seeming really clunky with the other good Miracle cards. So I don't think that this is going to go in a Miracle Rogue deck, but I could see a world where like Mine Rogue would want this. You know, like Mine Rogue has a lot of very specific things it wants to get. And if it's not Mine Rogue, it'll be something like that, right? Something where you want to find a few specific pieces for a combo, and drawing 7 cards at a time is a good way to find it. So I don't know. It seems like a good card. It's just not like, it's not going in every rogue deck. Imagine this thing went face instead of just to a minion. Whew. All right, then we have Blood Rock Company Shovel. So the Rogue Excavate card is the Azurite Scorpion. It is a 4 mana 5/5 Elemental Beast. Battlecry, get 4 random spells. If you've excavated 8 times, they cost 0. So I don't know if you've ever played this Unwell, but I have. And getting 4 random spells is getting 4 random bad spells a lot of the time. So I'm actually not super impressed with this treasure. It gets a lot better if you've excavated 8 times. If you've excavated 8 times, all of your bad spells that were bad because they cost too much suddenly don't cost too much and become good spells. But how many times are we gonna excavate in this class in Wild? I don't really think it's enough. So this might just be kind of a standard deal, or this will probably be a standard deal. And then just random spells in Wild, right, are so bad. The nice thing about Blood Rock Company Shovel, though, is it's a 1 mana 1/3 weapon, get a decent card. So like all the common treasures are pretty good. So this could also be treated as a standalone decent card. 1 mana 1/3 weapon, and then when it goes away you get a decent card to use later. I think Wild might be past the point where it really like that type of thing, but it's something to consider if you want a cheap weapon. Then we have Bounty Wrangler, 3 mana 3/4, quick draw or combo, get a coin. So if you play this the turn you draw it, you get a coin. If you combo it out, you get a coin. It doesn't say quick draw and combo, so I'm actually not sure if you get 2 coins off of this if you combo it and play it the turn you draw it, but I assume you would. If you can't get 2, then I hate this card. Because getting 1 off of this I think is really mid. But especially because you don't get it with a battle cry, so you can't use it with Bran. I understand you can use it with Shark, but Shark costs 1 more than Bran. Considering in Wild we have such easy access to coins at 1 mana less than this, I don't really see this being great unless we can get 2 coins off of it very consistently. Then we have Antique Flinger, 4 mana 5/4, battle cry. If you've excavated twice, destroy an enemy minion. I love cards like this. I don't think that the excavates are there, for Wild at least. Then we have Wishing Well, 5 mana 0/7. After you play a coin, get a random legendary minion from another class and set its cost to 1. So I assumed that this was just, you know, coins, not anything with coin in the title, but apparently counterfeit coin does work. So this is like a memer's dream card. I think it costs 5 mana, which is like basically infinite in Wild, but after you play a coin you get a random legendary minion that costs 1. It's going to be really you know, if the game goes late enough to where you can play 3 coins the turn you play this, it's going to be a pretty big swing. I think that this is just a for funnies card, but we'll see. And then we have Drilly the Kid, 4 mana 4/3 mech, battle cry, quick draw, and death rattle, excavate a treasure. This is good, right? This is a really good excavate card. We do see the word and, not or there. So you could get 3 excavates off of this, but the fact that the good excavate treasure needs you to excavate 8 times, then you just got this and the shovel and the neutrals, Ugh. I don't have a lot of faith in it. Then we have Velarok Windblade. While this is in your hand, play 3 cards from other classes to reveal Velarok's true form, 3 mana 3/3. So Velarok's true form is Velarok the Deceiver, which is a 3 mana 3/6 dragon with charge. After this attacks, discover a card from another class. It costs 3 less. So this is another card that's going to be a really fun inclusion for my stupid Bizarre Burglary Reno Rogue deck that I like to build sometimes. I do think that the card it becomes is good enough that it'll be worth considering in standard, but Thief Rogue is so much harder to pull off in wild. I don't imagine that this will be enough to change that. I do think that it'll be like one of the primo cards in those types of decks. It's just, you know, it's a Thief Rogue card. So that was the rogue cards. Not super impressed with a lot of them. There are several that like look fun to play. The type of rogue decks that I like to build, I think that there's a lot for me to mess with here. But as far as like how is this going to change wild rogue decks, I think that the one that has the closest is Greedy Partner, the neutral card. Just like we talked about in the Quest Mage deck, it's if you have another 2-cost card in your hand, you get a coin. And we already see Mailbox Dancer played in Miracle Rogue. If this activates consistently enough, you know, that could be a good card. But none of the other rogue stuff really seems that great in wild. So what I ended up doing is building a Wishing Well deck. So my initial plan was to do the Lucky Sevens Miracle Rogue deck, and that just like that looked awful. But it was pointed out to me that the Wishing Well exists, and we're making a lot of coins anyway. So it's much like the Edwin Giants Miracle Rogue deck that we see currently, but some of the filler cards are replaced with Wishing Well and Wishing Well synergies. Mimic Pod I have tested in regular Miracle Rogue, and I think that it's aggressively mediocre. I think it's so whatever. However, we need additional 2 costs in this deck to go with Greedy Partner. Having just Swindle and just Mailbox Dancer as your only other activators just isn't going to make the cut. And Mimic Pod, being a card you don't want to play if you have anything better to do on that turn, means it's going to linger in your hand a little bit more often. So it's not like strictly awful, right? If you hit nice things with Mimic Pod, it ends up being pretty good. But you're going to hate it every time you hit the Wishing Well. And like even Arcane Giant, especially early on, felt really bad as a hit to me. So that's my spiel on why Mimic Pod is bad, but in this deck anyway. There's not a lot more to say here than that. It's just you generate a bunch of coins and you can either use them on your Edwin or you can use them on your Wishing Well and then proceed as you would normally. And finally we have Warrior. So for the spells we have Misfire, 2 mana, deal 3, 2, and 1 damage to random minions, quick draw, choose the targets. I think Minefield and Man the Cannons are probably both better than this. This is very similar to Minefield, except Minefield doesn't deal surplus damage, right? If your opponent has a 3/2 and a 1, this could deal 1 to the 3, 3 to the 1, and 2 to the 2, I guess, but end up overkilling and leaving stuff up in awkward ways. If you top deck it, that's great, but like you don't want a card that's only good when you top deck it. If even Warrior is approaching having a decent Reno deck, then I think that this probably makes the cut in that, but I don't think it's as good as either of our current decent 2 mana clears. Then we have Reinforced Plating, 3 mana, gain 6 armor, excavate a treasure. So the Warrior Excavate is the Azurite Ox, 4 mana 5/5 elemental beast, battle cry, discover 2 8-cost minions and summon them. And I think that the Azurite Ox is very good. It's a lot of stats for what you're getting. It's just, are there enough excavates in your deck to make this happen? And there might be. Reinforced Plating in standard seems really good to me because you already have Odin. This is really good for that. You advance your excavate stuff and it's also burst damage with your Odin up. I don't have a lot of faith in excavates landing in wild, but Reinforced Plating isn't bad. Blast Charge is though. 3 mana, destroy a damaged enemy minion, excavate a treasure. So this is not nerfed Execute because this also gets you a card, right? If you remember nerfed Execute, how good was 2 mana Execute? And the answer is not very, in my opinion. 1 mana Execute is barely hanging on these days. It feels like a card that you don't really want to include in anything. So paying 2 extra mana to excavate a treasure on Execute doesn't sound like something I'm excited to do. It might be good enough to do if I have to. I'm not happy about it. We've had 3 mana Execute before with the dragon synergies, and that was like okay, but it fell off pretty quick, right? Then we have Battle Pickaxe, 3 mana 4/1. After you play a taunt minion, gain +1 durability. This is very reminiscent of King's Defender, except not actually bad. I do think that this is probably the best thing the Warrior got. if you remember Dread Corsair existing, you play this on 3, you play your Dread Corsair, and it starts off with +1 durability. And then every taunt you play after that keeps it going. If you Corsair cache this, it starts off as a 5/2, and then you can Dread Corsair it to keep it going. Seems pretty good, seems pretty sticky fingerable, pretty Zephyrsable. Probably going to be a very tilting deck, but a fun deck when those things don't happen. On to the minions, we have Unlucky Powderman. 2 mana, 2/2 undead, taunt, death rattle, give taunt minions in your hand and deck +1/+1. So this is a Keleseth that hits your hand and doesn't require you not to run any 2s. So it's pretty cool. The fact that it only hits taunts makes it very restrictive, right? And the fact that it's a death rattle makes it a little bad, but it's kind of cool. So what's nice about this in Wild is that we have so many Serenite Chain Gang. So we have the original Serenite Chain Gang, we have Pack Mule, and we have the new Serenite Chain Gang with Quick Draw to get an extra Serenite. All of those existing and having that Axe is a big payoff for pressure makes me have a little bit of faith in this card. I don't think that any of this taunt stuff is reviving Sulfuras, by the by. Sulfuras, I think, needs a ton of really cheap taunts that are good to see play. So like if we get a bunch of like 1 mana taunts that draw a card or something like that, then maybe we can Sulfuras again. But I don't think that the strengths of these new taunt cards are going to exhibit themselves in a deck built to activate the Sulfuras quest. Then we have Detonation Juggernaut, 5 mana, 3/6 mech with taunt. Battlecry, give your taunt minions in your hand +2/+2. We have actually seen 5 mana, give your hand +2/+2 see play before in Hand Paladin, or Hand Buff Paladin rather, but that was several years ago at this point, and I think that the game has advanced in speed since then. Then we have Blast Tortoise, 6 mana, 2/7 beast, taunt, Battlecry, deal damage to all enemy minions equal to this minion's attack. So obviously this is meant to be buffed. It is a battle cry, not a death rattle, which means it's not stupid. But yeah, this would be really cool if you buffed it a little bit. I kind of wrote this off before, but I'm like excited to play with it now. I don't think my opinion of it has changed, but like, I don't know, look how funny he is. And like the idea of buffing this to be like a 4 attack minion even, and playing it on 6 and just letting it destroy all the enemy minions. That's gonna be fun. I really want to play this now. But no, I think that's very situational for Wild. I don't expect it to be very good. I kind of hope it's good in Standard. I want to play this. Then we have Badlands Brawler, 7 mana, 4/4, battle cry, start a brawl. If you've excavated twice, this always wins. So this is very good, I think, for an excavate deck. This is like the payoff for the excavate decks. I know that there's a legendary that's supposed to be the payoff, but I think this is the payoff. 7 mana 4/4 destroy all other minions is nuts. I think that that's really good. I think that's some of the best. Oh my goodness, it just hit me. Oh my goodness, it all costs 3. Oh no. So odd excavate warrior, huh? Interesting. All right, I'm gonna have to build that. Maybe I should have built that for the showcase deck because I know a lot of you like it. But odd excavate warrior is on the table. Having 2 good clears in Odd Warrior. Brawl stinks, but Brawl that you always win is very good, and Sanitize is good in Odd Warrior. But even outside of that, like, I expect this to be really good in Standard. I think the Excavate cards are probably too Wild slow for this to be good in Wild, but this card itself is very good. Excellent payoff for Excavating. Then we have Boom Boss Thogren, 8 mana 7/7 battle cry, shuffle 3 TNT into your deck. When drawn, blow up a card in the enemy's hand, deck, and battlefield. So this blows up a card, not a minion. So this can hit spells and it can hit locations. My understanding is that unlike Reno, this does not hit uninteractables, and I don't think it hits weapons either. So this is going to be an 8 mana 7/7 do nothing the turn you play it, which is pretty gross. There is the 3 mana 3/3 neutral card that draws a card that didn't start in your deck. So you could run this and 2 of those and try to expedite getting the TNTs out of your deck. But I think that that's like a lot to ask for. I think if you do this and draw the TNTs, it's going to feel pretty good. When you play this, you're not going to draw the TNTs in time for it to matter a lot, I think. So I expect this to really annoy the Standard players that hated Ticketus, and otherwise not to see a whole lot of play in at least Wild. What's really unfortunate is this turns off your own Highlander stuff. So like Reno Warrior is absolutely the place that I would like to play a card like this, but you can't because it turns off your Highlander stuff. Then we have Slagmaw, the Slumbering, 4 mana 16/16 elemental beast with rush and taunt, but it's dormant for 8 turns. It becomes dormant for less turns every time you excavate. So you can play this on 4, and then on 5, it ticks down to 7 more turns. But you excavate once because you have 5 mana and your excavate cards cost 3. I guess you have the kobold. So you could do one of your 3 cost ones and the kobold and tick this down to still dormant for 3 turns. And then on the next turn, if you have another excavate card, you can tick it down to 0. So that's a lot to go right to get this out still 2 turns later. And I don't know if you guys remember Shadow or Death or Big Game Hunter or Siphon Soul or Plague of Flames or Poison Seeds or Najak Hexen or Anduin or any of those type of cards, but they exist. And they will pet this Slagma real good, and it will go back to being the Slumbering, if you know what I mean. So I don't have a lot of faith in this card being any good in Wild, at least. I think it's going to be a really fun card. I think I'm going to look forward to playing this in Standard. It is not odd, so it doesn't go in my funny Excavate Odd Warrior deck that I just thought of. But I don't know, I'll definitely try it. Like, I'm gonna try to make a video with this for sure. I think it's a really cool card. It's just excavates are pretty overcosted for Wild, and this in the best case scenario is still really slow and vulnerable. So those were the Warrior cards. I'm not that excited for Warrior this expansion because the excavate stuff seems a little hopeful, and you know, I just got a really cool Warrior expansion, so it's gonna be hard to top the even Warrior. But as far as like building an aggro deck, like if you wanted to play an aggro warrior, which I kind of do, we do have a bit of potential. So the battle pickaxe is the nuts. That card is phenomenal. It's like a swordfish, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. You keep playing stuff and it keeps being active. So this is an aggro taunt warrior. We're running the cheap good taunts like Target Dummy, Wax Elemental, to benefit from Unlucky Powderman and the other hand buff taunt cards that are already good. So like Bolster is good and Into the Fray is good. We got Stolen Goods in Caverns of Time. It was updated to be not a bad card anymore. So it's going to draw you a taunt minion and give it +2/+2. But we have all those Serenite cards. So we have the classic Serenite Chain Gang as well as the new Azurite Chain Gang. That's the same thing except quick draw for a 3rd. And Encumbered Pack Mule, which for the functionality of this deck is Chain Gang, but you have the option to play one on one turn and one on another. Hobart Grapple Hammer is in here because all of the Serenite Chain Gang cards get 2 iterations of whatever you buff them with. So it's nice to have all of the decent buffs, and we're running 2 Corsair Cache and 2 Battle Pickaxe. So we're hoping to have that on 3 really consistently, which means we can Hobart on 4 really consistently. So there is a little bit of Menagerie synergy in here, mostly just Mistake, as far as like cards that are only in here to be Menagerie minions, but Target Dummy is a mech, Pack Mule is a beast, Unlucky Powderman is an undead, Wax Elemental is an elemental, Patches is a pirate and a demon, and you only need 1 minion with a tag on board for Roaring Applause to be a good card. So 2 mana, draw 2 cards is a good card. But if you have any more than that, it becomes a phenomenal card, right? 2 mana, draw 3 cards is amazing. We wanted another cheap pirate to pull Patches out of the deck, and Mistake is not just a pirate, it's other things too. So if we have Dread Corsair and Patches and Mistake out, we get to draw 4 cards, whereas with any other pirate, we're only drawing 3. Roaring Applause, very flexible, good card for decks with even mild Menagerie synergy like this one. The good, strong part of this deck is Battle Pickaxe, and then the like secondary nice strategy is all the Serenite stuff. This is like a rough concept, but I do think that it has a lot of potential to be an actual real Wild deck based on the power of Battle Pickaxe. So we'll see how that comes together. And that wraps up all the classes for Showdown in the Badlands. Thank you for joining me on this journey of new style of card review video. I actually really like how these look when I'm done with them. And from an editing standpoint, having those large sections where it's only showing the cards makes it a lot easier. So one of my big struggles when I do card review videos is how much effort it goes into editing them, which is why so many of the ones I've done have ended up just being raw Twitch footage, just because of like the amount of time it takes to make those. The amount of presentable that I want is far beyond worth it. I think the snag I ran into this time is I went into this thinking that we would know all the neutrals and then we would get class by class, but we only learned the final neutrals halfway through. So there's not a lot of like rewatch value, not that I think a lot of people would, but the other snag I ran into is if I do the classes one at a time, they ended up being too short for the algorithm to appreciate my upload, so it shows it to less people. So I think what I might do in the future is try to set up the slides and start working on the decks as the information comes out, and still not post a review video until we know what all the cards are, and then just do like 3 of them in a row, split up some way, and then actually cover all the neutrals as their own thing too. But it's like 3 months before I have to worry about that, so we'll figure it out when the time comes. But anyways, let me know what you thought of this style of review videos. As usual, what you thought of these decks, what you thought of the cards we talked about. I really appreciate your comments. Reading your comments is one of the great joys of posting a video on YouTube, so I really appreciate everyone who leaves a comment, even if it's to criticize me. And especially those of you who are posting every day and just posting for the algorithm. I see you, I remember you. I really appreciate that. It helps me out. That's why you're doing it. Thank you for that. So yeah, like and subscribe to support the channel. I will see you next week for some Showdown in the Badlands. Blah, ba-da, blah, ba-da, ba, blah, ba-da, blah, ba-da, ba, blah, ba-da, blah, ba-da, ba, blah, ba-da, blah, ba-da, ba.